America's Guard of Honor, A Brief History by Robert M. Albertson, Jr. Symbols of Unity and Valor, All-American Honor. The fifth jump was supposed to be my moment of triumph. For most guys, it meant graduation, a ticket punched. For me, it ended with a leg brace, a clipboard full of amended orders, and a quiet exit from the Ranger indoctrination program before I ever made it through the gate. It wasn't the outcome I wanted, but I wasn't broken up about it either. Injuries happen. The assignment changed, but the mission didn't. I was rerouted to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, permanent duty with the 82nd Airborne Division. It wasn't a step down. If anything, it was the best chance I had to get back into the pipeline later. The 82nd had a reputation of skill development, which allowed the trooper opportunities to try out for Ranger School or the Q course and other elite teams. I wasn't done, just redirected. I was an E1 private, still recovering, both physically and mentally. Just weeks earlier, I'd been laid up with a brace strapped to my leg, nursing the slow ache of torn ligaments and the sharper sting of failure. There was no ceremony, no brass band, no high fives or back slaps. That morning, it was just a bus that hissed to a halt, stepping off a sun-faded Bluebird bus, tan, quiet, and unceremonious, into the processing center for the 82nd Airborne Division, where a formation of stone-faced paratroopers stood under a Carolina sky, expressions unreadable, buried beneath the weight of legacy. It was over the next few weeks, as I sat through briefings and classes. I didn't even know my battalion yet when I got my first real education in the 82nd Airborne Division's history. It didn't come from a formation speech or a wall display. It came from a quiet correction. After a particularly asinine statement, just me running my mouth like I already belonged, someone pulled me aside. A staff sergeant. No-nonsense face, squared shoulders, ribbons from Desert Storm stacked high over his heart, and eyes that looked like they'd seen things no briefing slide ever could explain. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. He just pointed to the right side of my chest and said, "You wear those because someone else died earning them. Make sure they'd be proud of you." That landed like a steel boot to the ribs, hard, true, and it stuck. As I processed into the division, shuffled from one briefing to another, handed gear I was now personally responsible for maintaining, I started to see it all through a different lens. Arrogance and potential might get you through the front gate, but neither earned you a place in this unit. That had to be earned every day. History here wasn't optional, it was briefing material, and it was worn, literally on both sides of the uniform. Unit awards, earned long before I was ever born, were now pinned into my Class A's. Not because I'd earned them, but because I'd been entrusted to carry the weight of their memory, to represent those who had. The sky blue cord on my shoulder marked me as a graduate of the Fort Benning Infantry School. The airborne wings on my chest said I'd passed the basic course which everyone here has done. But the patch on my sleeve, the AA, the ribbons and cord to the right of it, those weren't mine. It was borrowed glory. My job was to elevate my skill set and live up to those honors. I stood there, holding my breath, looking down at the colors of campaigns I had never fought, battles I had never heard, blood I had not spilled, and yet was being entrusted to carry forward. It felt like standing in borrowed boots. Not because they didn't fit, but because they weren't mine yet. I had no business coasting, no excuse for half-effort, no right to breathe the same air as these men if I wasn't ready to match their intensity, their commitment, their sacrifice. Something inside me shifted that day. Not quickly, not with fanfare, but deeply. A quiet recalibration. I stopped thinking about the uniform as something I wore. It became something I answered to. This wasn't about checking boxes. It wasn't about sliding under the radar or making it through inspections without getting smoked. It was about rising, day after day, to the standard that had been set by better men in worse conditions. The patches, the cords, the ribbons, they didn't make me elite. They made me accountable. I was in the company of giants. And from that moment on, I trained like it. This wasn't about getting airborne pay or stacking up badges. It was about living up to men who had died under that same patch. If soldiers had stormed Normandy and held Bastogne, If they had fought in Vietnam, Panama, and Desert Storm under that iconic patch for the 80 Deuce, as it was referred in my day, then I could damn well do my part. This wasn't just a unit. It was a living legacy, stitched in valor, worn on the shoulder, and carried into every fight by those brave or broken enough to wear it. And whether I ever earned my way to Ranger School or walked in the footsteps of the legends sewn into that history, I knew one thing for sure. And from that moment forward, I swore I'd earn every inch of cloth. Void of an emblem. Before the world tore itself open in 1914, before mustard gas and machine guns rewrote the rules of combat, the United States Army was a ghost by comparison of its modern status. A shadow force of isolationists, professional but faceless, modest in size and almost Spartanist in its presentation. No need for flash, no demand for ornament. Its uniform said everything and nothing. Woolen tunics in government-issue brown, campaign hats slung low over eyes that answered to rank, not reputation. The sleeves were blank. Intentionally so. This wasn't an oversight, it was policy, it was doctrine. It didn't take a firefight to reveal the cracks in the old system. Soldiers once spent entire careers inside a single regiment, loyal to colors more familiar than the flag itself. They served captains, not countries. Followed banners, not doctrine. And when the bullets flew, they fought with fierce pride, but only for their own. Elihu Root, Secretary of War in 1899 and a lawyer by trade, saw through the tradition. His mind worked like a field-grade weapon, sharp, deliberate, devastating. Root recognized that regimental pride might win a skirmish, but it couldn't win a modern war. So he cut deep. His reforms didn't massage policy, they broke it down to the studs. He dismantled the practice of lifetime regimental service, severing the old tribal chains. He created a centralized general staff, placing strategy in the hands of professionals, and he laid the cornerstone of future leadership with the Army War College, forging thinkers as well as fighters. These weren't bureaucratic tweaks, they were a scalpel to the Army's soul. Root inherited a patchwork of proud units. He left behind the spine of a unified force. But even Root's doctrine, as rigid as it was revolutionary, couldn't hold its ground forever. Doctrine never survives first contact with a global war, and yet the legacy endured. Today, when a soldier packs his duffel and ships out to a new duty station after 3 years, it's more than routine rotation. It's Root's ghost walking the corridors. A quiet institutional reminder. In the United States Army, no one belongs to a building, a base, or even a battalion. They serve the Army, and the Army serves the people. When Europe ignited and nations mobilized armies the size of American cities, Washington scrambled to build a force that could compete. The call went out. Recruits poured in. Installations like Camp Gordon in Georgia sprang up overnight, cities of mud and canvas, alive with southern humidity and the sound of green soldiers learning how to kill. Among them stood a division unlike any before. The 82nd Infantry Division was a mosaic stitched from every corner of America. Farm boys from Iowa, factory hands out of Ohio, Cajuns from the bayous, Yankees from cold brick cities, Texans with dust still on their boots, and first-generation sons of immigrants still dreaming in broken English. No common region, no shared dialect, nothing to unify them but an oath spoken under the same flag and a roster number barked out at morning roll call. Camp Gordon became the birthplace of their trials. However, a significant issue was revealed. Before there were patches, identification on the battlefield was primitive. Flags, banners, shouted names in the dark. Confusion was inevitable. Men died following the wrong officer. Units split under shell fire. The U.S. Army was about to march into a new kind of Europe, one where machine guns replaced muskets and confusion killed quicker than the enemy. And in that fog, commanders realized something. You couldn't forge unity from geography alone. These men needed more than rations and a rifle. Even the most disciplined soldier needs something to recognize, something to belong to, something to fight for, something like an emblem. This was the Army's last hour in anonymity. The revolutionary Camp Gordon was where it dawned whom it really was. This was the moment before the insignia, before airborne wings, before ranger tabs, before regimental crests, before the patch which became symbols of bloodline and brotherhood, the birthplace of the AA, and the legend it was to become. The dawn of an emblem. But with the patch came clarity, instant, unmistakable, unifying. Camp Gordon didn't just produce soldiers, it gave rise to a symbol that would outlive the war itself. No longer a simple marker of assignment, the insignia was forged into a legacy through acts of raw courage, brutal sacrifice, an unspoken bond, and an unwavering commitment to the mission. What began in obscurity at Camp Gordon rose through Normandy, Sicily, Vietnam, and beyond to global recognition. The solution didn't come down from command. It rose from within the ranks, quietly, without ceremony. A simple idea, born in the barracks and stitched with thread, a red square, a blue circle, and 2 white letters, AA, for All American. What began as a tool for recognition quickly evolved into something far more potent. It was never about decoration. The AA wasn't handed out. It was earned, day after day, in the punishing sun of Georgia drills, in the cold calculus of trench warfare, and later, in places not yet imagined, through clouds of flak over Normandy, in the frozen ruins of Bastogne, the sweltering jungles of Southeast Asia, and the scorched alleys of Fallujah. But back then, it was still just cloth. No fanfare accompanied its birth, no orders were shouted, but every man who wore it understood this was more than a unit patch. It stood for the cost of pulling strangers into Brotherhood. It was an answer to chaos, a rally point stitched to the shoulder, a visual bond in a war defined by fragmentation. In the sweltering summer of 1917, as Camp Gordon buzzed with the energy of newly conscripted soldiers preparing for the Great War, recently appointed Brigadier General William P. Burnham to Divisional Command Officer was faced with a unique challenge: to train and mold a diverse assembly of men into a single, cohesive fighting unit. To accomplish this, it would require more than drills and discipline. It demanded a forged identity, something that could bind strangers into brothers and give each man a reason to stand his ground when the bullets started flying. Drawing from his extensive military experience in the Spanish-American War and the Philippine-American War, he understood the power of symbolism in building esprit de corps. To instill this unity, Burnham initiated a naming contest for the 82nd Division, collaborating with the soldiers under his command, the citizens of Atlanta, and the Atlanta Georgian newspaper. The initiative invited thousands of submissions, reflecting the collective effort to define the division's character. The judging panel, comprising Georgia Governor Hugh Dorsey, Major Roylan E. Beebe, and Burnham himself, among the thousands of entries, one stood out: All-American Division, proposed by Mrs. Vivian Goodwin, a patriotic schoolteacher from Atlanta. Her submission resonated deeply with the division's composition, reflecting the unity of soldiers hailing from every corner of the nation. On April 6, 1918, marking the first anniversary of America's entry into World War I, the name was officially adopted, encapsulating the division's spirit and purpose. By the fall of 1918, divisional command passed to Major General George B. Duncan, a seasoned combat leader with a tactical mind and a deep understanding of morale. He would soon collaborate with Private William B. Price, a meticulous draftsman with an eye for designs, to craft an emblem that reinforced the recently adopted All-American moniker, a name applied to the 82nd just months before Duncan took the reins. Before his military service, Price honed his artistic talents in a civilian drafting office, producing technical blueprints and commercial illustrations. His experience in translating complex ideas into clear visual representations made him an ideal candidate to design a symbol that would encapsulate the division's values of courage, sacrifice, and unity. Price's ability to see beyond mere shapes and into the deeper meaning of symbols allowed him to craft an emblem that would resonate with soldiers from all walks of life. Major General George B. Duncan, a West Point graduate of the class of 1886, carried into Camp Gordon a combat resume forged across 3 decades of American conflict. He had seen the mud and malaria of the Spanish-American War, fought guerrillas in the Philippine jungles, and had already marched through the early bloodletting of the European front with the 26th Infantry Division, the 1st Brigade of the 1st Division, and the 77th Infantry Division. Duncan was no stranger to the complexities of modern war. or to the psychological toll it exacted on his men. He had learned firsthand that unit identity mattered, not as decoration, but as armor for the spirit. It boosted morale when the fighting dragged on, when the letters from home stopped coming, and when the only thing between order and collapse was the symbol on a soldier's sleeve. His leadership during the Moose-Argonne offensive, now at the helm of the newly constructed 82nd Division, reflected a principle Duncan had carried through every campaign: foster cohesion, instill pride, and forge a force that would not just fight, but fight as one. The mission to create the 82nd Division's emblem was anything but straightforward. Designs came and went, dozens of sketches pinned to the wall, each one dismissed for being too ornate, too abstract, or too provincial. None could capture what the division had become: a national force, forged from every state, bound not by geography but by purpose. It was only through the steady collaboration between Private William B. Price, with his draftsman's eye, and Major General George B. Duncan, with his battlefield instinct for morale and cohesion, that the right symbol finally emerged. The result wasn't just aesthetically sharp, it was psychologically potent. It was a banner small enough to stitch onto a sleeve, yet powerful enough to rally a division destined for the unforgiving battlefields of Europe. Duncan didn't treat it like decoration. He understood exactly what it was. The patch is more than cloth. It is the silent voice of commitment, no abstraction. It was chosen with intent. That shade didn't whisper, it declared. It stood for courage and bravery, plain and absolute, the fiery resolve to push forward through chaos, to advance when bullets slice the air, and every instinct screamed to stay down. It symbolizes the soldier committed to duty, willing to give the ultimate sacrifice, not for glory, but in defense of freedom and the brothers who fight beside him. The historical record reveals this long-standing military tradition. Red stands for valor, gallantry under fire, and honor earned in blood. Surrounding the emblem's heart lay a centered circle of deep blue, a nod to loyalty and vigilance. This color was carefully selected to echo the blue field on the American flag, emphasizing fidelity to nation and mission. The blue circle was more than decorative. It was a constant reminder of unity, discipline, and the unyielding watchfulness required to survive in hostile environments. It symbolized the steadfast spirit of the division, binding men together in a shared purpose, unwavering and true. Dominating the emblem were the unmistakable stylized white letters, AA, standing prominently against the backdrop. White, the color of purity and clarity, highlighted the division's core identity: all-American. The letters themselves encapsulated a powerful concept. Soldiers came from every state, every corner of the vast American landscape, forming a single cohesive fighting force. This unifying element, envisioned during the division's creation in World War I, set a precedent for integration and collective strength unmatched in its day. The AA proudly announced to friend and foe alike that this division was a microcosm of American strength, unity, and melting pot. As World War II loomed and military doctrine turned toward the sky, the U.S. Army began embracing a bold new strategy: vertical envelopment, the insertion of troops by air behind enemy lines to disrupt, confuse, and fracture. With that doctrinal leap came a transformation within the 82nd Infantry Division itself. The storied AA patch, a symbol forged in the trenches of the Great War, would not be replaced, it would be crowned. The addition of the airborne tab, stitched in bold white letters on a field of blue, wasn't mere ornamentation. It was a battlefield proclamation. It preserved the division's sacred lineage, tying to its future in airborne warfare, to honor its achievements, earned and sacrificed losses in World War I. But it also signaled a fundamental transformation. These men weren't just infantry anymore. They were jump qualified, parachute deployed, and trained to strike first where the enemy least expected it. The airborne tab wasn't issued. It was earned, in bone-deep silence at the edge of a jump door, boots hanging out into black sky, heart thudding louder than the C-47's engines. That blue arc above the AA wasn't decoration. It was identification. Not for the public, but for the man next to you, for the one who would be floating somewhere to your left or right in the dead of night, trusting you without question. The tab curved like a blade unsheathed above the red and blue of the 82nd, an emblem already soaked in the sacrifice of the Great War. But now it meant something more. It meant you went in first, before the tanks, before the airfields were secured, before command had a complete map. And when you went, you didn't just go as a soldier, you went as a brother. That arch, in that color, told the world that when these men leapt into the dark, through flak bursts and tracer rounds, into fields they hadn't seen and towns they'd never pronounce, they did so together. Not side by side, but in the same column of wind, scattered across the sky like steel rain, each one knowing beyond doubt that his battle buddy was drifting nearby, locked and loaded, already thinking about which German radio tower or roadblock to demolish first. There was no radio check, no roll call, no time, just a gut feeling and years of drilled trust that said, he's out there too. And when you hit the ground, hard and fast, tangled in chute lines or face down in a French beat field, the only sound more reassuring than your own heartbeat was the low grunt of a fellow paratrooper setting up a perimeter, breathing just as hard, just as ready to raise hell. That's what the airborne tab represented. It wasn't just a badge, it was a bond. It was the certainty that you were never alone. Not in the jump door, not in the air, not in the fight. The arch above the AA wasn't just marking a new mission set. It was a contract. When that tab sat above the patch, it meant this soldier drops from the sky, lands in chaos, and fights without backup, because he is the backup. And for the enemy, that meant one thing. The 82nd was already behind their lines, already disrupting their comms, blowing up their bridges, and rallying the resistance before dawn had even broken. The patch said where they came from. The tab said how they'd arrive. But only the man wearing both understood why. Because beside him, in the wind, was another soldier just like him, not watching his six, sharing it. The timeless design took on additional layers of meaning, signaling not just unity and bravery, but a resolute commitment to taking risks that others could scarcely imagine. The letters symbolize a revolutionary concept at a time when regional divisions and prejudices still lingered stubbornly within the nation's fabric. Price's vision distilled the diverse spirit of America itself into a clear, powerful image, and Duncan fiercely championed it through the bureaucratic maze of military heraldry. Once refined by the Army's meticulous heraldic section, the responsibility of mass-producing the patch fell to the U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps, whose facilities quickly began crafting tens of thousands of patches, and the insignia swiftly began appearing on the uniforms of young soldiers bound for Europe. Immediately, it transformed from mere fabric to sacred emblem. Men marched straighter, eyes hardened with determination, hearts buoyed by pride, as troops departed American shores for the blood-soaked battlefields of Europe, becoming a powerful symbol of American unity and readiness. As the war unfolded, the AA would become synonymous with liberation and courage, recognized instantly by grateful populations from France to Belgium. Soldiers bearing this patch stormed trenches, liberated towns, and etched stories of heroism into history books, each act adding layers of reverence to the insignia. It became an enduring icon, revered not just for victories, but also for the countless lives solemnly honored beneath its vivid threads. As a result to the exceptional skill Private W.B. Price displayed in the initial sketches and Major General George B. Duncan's visionary leadership, birthed more than a military patch. They created a timeless emblem, an enduring banner beneath which generations of soldiers would proudly march, their heads high and spirits united by the silent, unbreakable bond of shared sacrifice and unwavering courage.